Pricing for Apple has always been, well, pricing for Apple. Hey guys, Ash here from C4E Tech, and Apple's new iPhones are here. And today in this video, we're going to be taking a closer look at the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be doing an unboxing. I did that as a short, and there's not really much in the box. Didn't want to waste your time doing a full unboxing. So what you get is basically the phone, a USB Type-C to Lightning cable, a SIM ejector tool in some markets, because in the US, there is no SIM tray on the phone. It's eSIM only. Anyways, apart from that, you've got a small leaflet and the Apple sticker. Since I did talk about that SIM tray, let us get started with the built-in design. Now, this phone, the iPhone 14 Pro Max, is very familiar in a lot of ways when you compare it to the 13 Pro Max. Now, the design is pretty much the same. You've got the same frosted glass finish to the back, Gorilla Glass to the front, you've got stainless steel to the sides, you still have IP68 water and dust resistance, and it's still a heavy phone, the same weight, 240 grams. This is gonna be that phone that every brand that's gonna launch a gaming phone is gonna compare to, saying, hey, we've got all this in a gaming phone. It weighs just a little more than the iPhone 14 Pro Max, because it's 240 grams. The weight is pretty evenly distributed. It doesn't feel very heavy, but it actually is. I don't know what better way to put that. Now, there are a few subtle changes. For example, the button placement, that's changed a little bit, moved the buttons around a little. And when you look closer at, say, the camera array, the accent colors on the lenses, that's changed. But these are all very minor changes. For all intents and purposes, this is pretty much identical to the iPhone 13 Pro Max. But those minor changes, they're still big enough that your iPhone 13 Pro Max cases aren't gonna fit on the 14 Pro Max. Now, if you actually break it down, it's ever so slightly shorter and narrower, but also a little bit thicker. But that's not what's gonna stop you from using older cases. It's more the button placements and the camera bump being a little bigger. So yes, the camera bump is bigger this time because the optics have changed. That also means the phone's gonna wobble a little more. Now, how Apple's managed to change those dimensions, well, the display size remains the same, is by thinning the bezel. So the bezels are ever so slightly slimmer this year. And the display, it's still 6.7 inches. It's an OLED panel, 120 Hertz. But the resolution, again, slightly tweaked, not something you're ever gonna notice. And the brightness, now this is noticeable. The brightness, the peak brightness has gone up to 2000 nits. So this is the brightest panel available, but it comes at a caveat. Now the caveat being something you're not gonna see mentioned in most videos because people don't live in a place as hot as where I live. So a couple of days back when I was actually playing around with this phone outside, I was taking a few camera samples, but then once I did that, with the ambient temperature being 38, 39 degrees, the display really dimmed. Now this is the iPhone 14 Pro Max side by side with a Mix Fold 2. Full brightness, but after about 10-15 minutes of use under the hot UAE sun. Now without that dimming, this is how the 14 Pro Max would look. So if you live in a place that's really hot, this might be something worth keeping in mind. That said, the display is excellent. Media consumption on this phone, really awesome. Well, the dynamic island part we will get to. Now this display also uses LTPO technology, which is very useful given this phone has always-on functionality. Apple's always-on implementation is a little different to what we've gotten used to on Android. On Android, with OLED screens, pretty much everything goes black, very few pixels remain lit, and that is how the battery is saved. Over here, almost the entire display is on. It's just dimmed, and given the LTPO technology, it drops down to 1 Hertz. Apple says the battery on this should be good enough to still give you excellent battery life, and if initial reports coming out are anything to go by, that seems to be true. Now remember how a little while back some elements of the lock screen could be tucked in behind the image? When the display switches to always on, these kind of pop back out in front. Little touches like these, I find them interesting. Now, while we are over here, let's also talk about the dynamic island. So guys, this is where Apple's taken a negative and kind of made it a feature, something Apple typically does. Now, with Android phones, you see we typically have a hole punch for the camera. So Apple has that on this phone. Apart from that, they also needed another hole punch, or rather a small kind of pill for their Face ID hardware. So what they did was kind of black out the pixels in between and make it a big pill and add some software functionality, which is the dynamic island. Say for example, you're getting a call, or if you've just connected AirPods to your phone, all these pop up here on the dynamic island. Even some background tasks, for example, when a timer is running, there's a lot of things that actually pop up over here, making it a hub of sorts for what's going on with your phone. Now, phones these days are getting bigger and bigger, and this is a pretty large phone. Now, the ease of using a phone usually depends on how easy it is for you to use it single-handed, which is where the whole reachability thing comes into play. Dynamic Island is a feature that you can never use single-handed because, hey, it is right over here. You're not going to be able to, finger gymnastic your way into using it. So it is something that's going to need you to use both hands. This is one of the reasons why when LG did this kind of implementation, not exactly with their second screen and all that, I wasn't very impressed. I was never happy with it because I always needed to use a second hand to actually use those features. So from that perspective, it feels a little wonky, but then again, let's see what Apple does with it. As of now, their implementation's been good. I need to spend more time with this phone before I can say if I actually like it or not. Initial impressions, I have mixed feelings. And guys, I also have mixed feelings about the entire cutout here. Now, in comparison to a notch, at first glance, it looks like a definite upgrade. But when you see these two side by side, this is actually a little lower than where the notch was. Yes, that is an area above where you can see what's happening. But when you watch a video, I kind of feel the notch was a little less distracting. Again, very early impressions. I'm gonna have to spend more time with this phone before I can say for sure if I find it annoying or if I find it intrusive. But for now, I do most definitely have mixed feelings about it. Talking about watching videos, the audio output, the stereo speakers, top notch, no pun intended. It's really loud, clear, excellent stuff. From a software perspective, iOS 16, it's smooth AF, the 120Hz refresh helps, and of course the specs inside, the A16 Bionic, a 4nm chip that is supposed to give a 15% boost overall from the last generation, which is paired with 6 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM. It gets the job done, whether it's just day-to-day use or playing intensive games. The iPhone 14 Pro Max is pretty much the power to beat for any phone launching in the next year. And while we are on specs, the battery, it's 4323 mAh. We still have the same wired and wireless charging speeds. Nothing's really changed there. What has changed though is this, the cameras. Now this is a major upgrade. The megapixel count has gone up for the first time since 2015, so that's been 7-8 years. We now have a 48 megapixel primary. It's also slightly wider than the last gen. Last gen was 26mm, this is 24. It's a f1.78 lens with sensor shift OIS, and as you can see, the images, they are exactly what you'd expect from an Apple flagship. A lot of detail, great colors, rich photos. Now if you were expecting 8K video because of the increase in megapixel count, well no, that hasn't happened. But the increased megapixel count, that is something that Apple's done with it. Now, of course, you could shoot Pro RAW and get fully detailed 48 megapixel shots and fully utilize the sensor, be able to zoom in after the shot's been taken, crop, do whatever you want. There'll be a lot more detail for you to play with. But that might not be very practical given that the base variant is still 128 gigs and 48 megapixel Apple Pro RAW tends to take up between 70 to 100 megabytes per image. And there's also the shutter lag to deal with. But Apple's done something interesting with this sensor. So basically with regular images, what happens is it shoots 48 megapixels and then downsamples it down to 12 megapixels to keep the file sizes manageable. But when you shoot 2x, it's gonna use what's at the center of the sensor. It's only gonna shoot 12 megapixels by default, meaning what you're seeing here is pretty much lossless coming straight out of the sensor. Now the telephoto is again 12 megapixels, so when you go between 1x to 3x, now you've got a center point there, so 2x shots should come out better. And the third sensor is a 12 megapixel ultra wide, which is supposed to be doing 3x better under low light. That's the claim from Apple, and it does seem to do better than the 13 Pro Max's ultra wide. Well, the hardware improvement is pretty impressive. Apple's also done a lot of things under the hood. Apple's calling this photonic engine. Now what photonic engine is pretty much what you've heard Android manufacturers talk about. They just call it AI. They give it one term. Apple's kind of taken it and put their own twist on it, their own branding on it. That's photonic engine. Machine learning, pixel by pixel analyzation, improving the overall quality of images is basically what it is. Now moving on to video, you can now shoot cinematic mode shots at 4K 24 and 4K 30. So it looks something like this. Of course, there is still work to be done, but it's much better than what you could do on the last generation. And action mode with improved stabilization is also back. In the few days that I've been spending with this phone, I've been impressed by the cameras. Guys, typically over the last year or over the last few years, when I've had to take one phone out to shoot as my secondary, my backup camera, I've typically ended up choosing an iPhone. Now, that's not because there aren't Android phones that do things better. Yes, there are Android phones that do certain things better, but overall as a package, Apple does tend to have a more stable, a more balanced out camera setup. And the 14 Pro Max seems to take all that and improve on it. Now, well, all that's great. This is the point where we talk about the pricing. And pricing for Apple has always been, well, pricing for Apple. And this year, prices have gone up in a lot of markets. Of course, the US pricing remains the same, just like last year. But in a lot of markets, Europe, India in particular, pricing's again gone up. And it is what it is. If you're someone who likes iOS, if you like the Apple ecosystem, if you like the long updates that Apple provides, if you like the overall balanced package that Apple has to offer, well, it is gonna cost a pretty penny, and that is not much to do about it. So anyways, that's been my first impressions with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. What do you guys think about this phone, apart from the fact that it's priced extremely high? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below, because the pricing, it's a given, right? Anyways, thanks for your time. If you liked the video, like it. If you disliked it, hit dislike. If you have something more complex to say, leave it in the comments. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. Ash here from C4E Tech signing off. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.